Imagine a world without evil, no deception, no suffering, no rebellion against God. If God is all-powerful, why hasn't he already destroyed Satan and the fallen angels? Why do they still exist, causing chaos and leading people astray? If God can wipe them out in an instant, why does he allow them to remain? This question has puzzled believers for centuries. Some see it as a mystery, others as a challenge to faith. But what if the answer is not in what God hasn't done, but in why he hasn't done it yet? What if their existence is not a sign of God's weakness, but of his greater plan? The Bible tells us that Satan's end is certain, that judgment is coming, and that his power is temporary. Yet until that final day, he roams, deceives, and opposes the will of God. But does that mean he is winning, or is something deeper at work? Something we may not fully understand? What if the delay in Satan's destruction is not because God can't act, but because he is working out a plan far greater than we can comprehend, a plan that reveals his justice, his wisdom, and his absolute sovereignty? God's sovereignty and ultimate plan are the foundation of all things in existence. He is not merely powerful. He is all-powerful. He is not simply in control. He is the author of time itself. When we ask why God does not destroy Satan or the fallen angels immediately, we must begin with this truth. God is sovereign, and everything unfolds according to his divine plan, not human expectation. To understand this fully, we must look beyond the surface, beyond what seems logical to the human mind. It is not about whether God can destroy Satan. Of course he can. It is about why he chooses not to. Yet God does not react. He ordains. He does not make decisions based on panic or frustration. His ways are higher than our ways, and his thoughts are beyond our comprehension. When Lucifer rebelled, God did not strike him down instantly. He cast him out of heaven, yes, but he allowed him to continue existing. Why? Because Lucifer's rebellion was not a disruption of God's plan. It became part of it. The existence of Satan is not evidence of God's weakness, but of his supremacy. He allows what he could destroy because he is not threatened by it. The moment Satan fell, his defeat was already sealed. The moment darkness rose, the victory of light was already determined. The world operates on a divine timeline. Everything has a season, and every event has its appointed time. From the beginning of creation to the final judgment, God's plan is unfolding precisely as he designed. The fall of man in the Garden of Eden did not surprise him. The corruption of the world did not force him to change his strategy. The cross was not a backup plan. It was the plan from the foundation of the world. And just as God allowed sin to enter the world so that redemption could be revealed, he allows Satan to operate so that ultimate justice can be fulfilled. Justice is not simply about destruction. It is about righteousness being revealed and fulfilled. If God had destroyed Satan immediately, what would that have accomplished? Would it have erased the rebellion from existence? Would it have changed the hearts of the angels who followed him? Would it have demonstrated God's righteousness fully? No. Instead, the existence of evil serves to contrast the perfection of God's justice. The very presence of Satan and the fallen angels magnifies the holiness of God because it forces the universe to recognize the distinction between rebellion and obedience, between wickedness and righteousness. Satan's continued existence serves another purpose. It allows humanity to choose. God does not force love, and he does not force obedience. The presence of opposition, of temptation, of darkness itself gives humanity the opportunity to decide whom they will serve. If God had destroyed Satan at the moment of his rebellion, then the story of free will, of faith, of redemption would have never unfolded. Instead, humanity would have lived in a world where no choice was required, where obedience was not tested, where faith was not necessary. But God desires relationship, not robotic submission. He desires people who choose him, not those who obey because they have no other option. God's sovereignty means he is in control even when it does not seem so. Many people look at the presence of evil and assume that God is absent, but in reality he is working all things toward a final conclusion. Satan is not free, he is allowed. He does not rule, he is permitted. Even his greatest schemes only serve to advance the ultimate victory of God. He thought the cross was his triumph, but it was his greatest defeat. He believes his influence over the world is his power, but it is merely the rope by which he will be bound. God's sovereignty means that even the rebellion of Satan serves a purpose in the grand story of creation. Everything that exists does so by God's will, and everything will be resolved according to his timing. If God has not yet ended Satan, it is because the story is not yet finished. The final judgment is not an if, but a when. Until that appointed time, Satan's presence only serves to prove what has already been determined, that God alone reigns, and his justice will be complete. God's nature is one of perfect love and justice, and at the heart of that nature lies the principle of free will. From the beginning, he created not just humans, but also angels with the ability to choose. He did not fashion them as mere servants programmed to obey, but as beings with the capacity to love, worship, and serve by their own will. Love that is forced is not love at all, and obedience without choice is not true devotion. This is the foundation upon which God created all sentient beings: the ability to choose him or to reject him. Lucifer, the most glorious of the angels, was given this same freedom. He was not created as an enemy, but as a high-ranking angel, beautiful and full of wisdom. But with free will came the possibility of rebellion, and Lucifer, in his pride, chose to defy God. He was not deceived by another force. He was not tricked or compelled. He made a deliberate choice to exalt himself above God, believing he could ascend to the highest throne. And because God honors free will, he did not prevent Lucifer from making that decision. He did not strip him of his ability to choose, nor did he destroy him the moment he fell. God's gift of free will extends even to the fallen angels who followed Lucifer. They were not forced into rebellion, they chose it. They saw the magnificence of God, they beheld his glory, yet they still decided to turn away. This reveals something profound. The power of choice is so significant that even in the very presence of God, one can still choose to reject him. If God had erased Lucifer and his followers the moment they rebelled, it would have invalidated the very principle upon which they were created. He does not revoke free will simply because it is misused. The existence of free will does not mean that choices are without consequence. Just as humans are accountable for their decisions, so too are the fallen angels. Lucifer and his followers were cast out of heaven, separated from the presence of God, but they were not annihilated. Their judgment is certain, but it will be carried out at the appointed time. If God had destroyed them immediately, their choice would have had no lasting weight. It would have rendered their decision meaningless, as if it never happened. Instead, their continued existence serves as a testimony to the reality of choice and the consequences that come with it. Some may question why God allows evil to persist if he has the power to eliminate it. But to remove the possibility of rebellion would mean removing the possibility of true righteousness. Light is only meaningful when contrasted with darkness. Obedience is only significant when disobedience is an option. If God had eliminated the fallen angels the moment they turned against him, the universe would never fully grasp the weight of sin, the depth of grace, or the power of redemption. Free will is not just about choosing between good and evil. It is about the unfolding of God's greater plan. The fallen angels serve as a demonstration of what happens when free will is used to reject God. They are a warning, a visible representation of the cost of rebellion. Their existence, though marked by wickedness, still falls within the boundaries of God's sovereignty. They may operate within the world, but they do not control it. They may seek to deceive, but they do not determine the outcome of history. God's respect for free will does not mean he is indifferent to evil. It does not mean that Satan and the fallen angels will go unpunished. Their end is certain and their fate is sealed, but God operates on his divine timeline, allowing their existence to serve a greater purpose. He is not in a hurry, nor is he desperate to assert his authority. His justice will be carried out in fullness, not in haste. Until that day comes, their existence stands as proof that free will is real, that choices have consequences, and that God's plan will unfold exactly as he has determined. The testing of humanity is not a mistake, nor is it an afterthought. It is an essential part of God's divine plan. From the very beginning, God created humanity with free will, giving them the ability to choose between obedience and rebellion, between righteousness and sin. But choice, by its very nature, must be tested. A choice. This is why Satan and the fallen angels have not been immediately destroyed, because their existence serves as a means of refining, proving, and strengthening those who seek God. In the Garden of Eden, God placed Adam and Eve in a perfect environment free from pain, suffering, or corruption. Yet even in that paradise, a test was required. The presence of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was not a flaw in creation, but a necessary part of free will. Without the possibility of disobedience, obedience would be meaningless. And so Satan was permitted to tempt humanity not because God was powerless to stop him, but because temptation is the very tool that reveals the heart. Adam and Eve's failure was not unknown to God, nor was it beyond his control. Rather, it set in motion the grand design of redemption, a plan that would reveal the depths of God's love and the power of true faith. Throughout history, humanity has faced trials, challenges, and temptations, and behind many of them is the influence of Satan and the fallen angels. This is not because God is absent or indifferent, but because testing is necessary for growth. A faith that is never tested is weak. A soul that is never refined remains impure. The trials of life, the battles against temptation, the struggles against the forces of darkness, all of these serve to strengthen and reveal the true nature of those who follow God. Without opposition, there is no victory. Without resistance, there is no strength. Satan's existence then is not a sign of God's weakness, but of his wisdom. He allows the enemy to act because in doing so, he separates the faithful from the unfaithful. In the book of Job, Satan comes before God and challenges the righteousness of Job, claiming that his faith is only strong because he has been blessed. God does not destroy Satan for making this accusation. Instead, he allows the test to proceed, not because he doubts Job's faith, but because the test will prove what is true. Job's suffering, though inflicted by the enemy, ultimately serves to glorify God and strengthen Job's faith. His story stands as a testament to the power of enduring trials. The fallen angels, much like Satan, serve as a force of opposition, seeking to corrupt, deceive, and lead humanity away from God. Yet even in their rebellion, they only act within the limits that God allows. Their temptations and deceptions are not beyond his control. Rather, they serve as a means of revealing the hearts of men. Those who resist temptation and stand firm in faith prove their devotion to God, not out of compulsion, but out of love and trust. Those who fall reveal their own weakness, their lack of commitment, and their true desires. This is why God has not yet removed Satan or the fallen angels. Their existence is a tool in his hands, a means of refining his people. Just as fire purifies gold, trials purify faith. Just as a storm tests the strength of a tree's roots, temptation tests the depth of a person's faith. Without such testing, there would be no distinction between the righteous and the unrighteous, between the faithful and the unfaithful. God's plan is not merely to create obedient followers, but to raise up a people who choose him despite opposition, who remain faithful despite trials, who resist temptation even when it would be easier to give in. This is why the enemy is permitted to remain, not because God is unable to destroy him, but because his presence serves a purpose. Every test, every trial, every temptation is an opportunity for humanity to prove where their hearts truly lie. And in the end, it is those who endure, those who remain steadfast, who will be counted among God's faithful. God's ultimate plan unfolds according to his divine timeline, not human expectations. He is not bound by urgency, nor does he operate on impulse. His actions are deliberate, purposeful, and aligned with his greater design for creation. The existence of Satan and the fallen angels is not an oversight, nor is it a sign of God's inaction. It is a part of his plan, set within a framework of divine timing that humanity cannot fully comprehend. When we ask why God has not yet destroyed Satan, the answer lies in the understanding that everything happens in its appointed season. Throughout history, God has demonstrated that he allows events to unfold according to his set times. In the days of Noah, he did not immediately wipe out corruption the moment it arose. He allowed time for repentance, time for the ark to be built, and time for his judgment to be revealed in fullness. The destruction of the wicked was not a reaction, it was a preordained event that took place exactly when God intended. Similarly, when Israel was enslaved in Egypt, God did not act hastily. He allowed generations to pass, shaping a people, preparing a deliverer, and setting the stage for an exodus that would serve as a testimony for all time. His deliverance was not late, it was perfect in its timing. This principle applies to the final judgment of Satan and the fallen angels. Their defeat is not uncertain, it is already decreed. But God has set an appointed time for their destruction, and that time has not yet come. Every moment that they exist serves a purpose within his divine narrative. It is not because God is waiting to see what they will do, nor is he engaged in a struggle to overpower them. There is no battle between equals, no uncertainty in the outcome. The war was won before it began. The moment Lucifer rebelled, his destiny was sealed. But God, in his infinite wisdom, allows events to unfold according to his preordained schedule. The delay in Satan's destruction is not a sign of weakness. It is a demonstration of divine patience and justice. God's timing is perfect because it allows his plan to be revealed in full. If Satan had been destroyed the moment he fell, there would be no need for the story of redemption. Humanity would not witness the full extent of God's mercy, his justice, or his sovereignty. The presence of evil in the world, though temporary, serves to contrast the greatness of God's righteousness. It allows for the revelation of his glory in ways that would not otherwise be possible. The cross is the ultimate example of God's perfect timing. For centuries, the world waited for the Messiah. Prophets spoke of his coming. Generations longed for deliverance, yet God did not send him immediately. When Christ finally came, he did so at the exact moment chosen by God. His sacrifice was not an emergency response to sin. It was the fulfillment of a plan set in place from the foundation of the world. The enemy believed he had achieved victory at the crucifixion, but in reality, he had only fulfilled what had already been written. The cross was not a moment of defeat. It was the greatest triumph of God's plan. In the same way, the final judgment of Satan is already written. Revelation speaks of a day when he will be cast into the lake of fire, when his deception will end and when his power will be stripped away completely. That moment will not come a second too soon or a second too late. Until that day, his existence serves to fulfill the purpose that God has determined. He may roam, deceive, and oppose the will of God, but only within the limits set by divine authority. He is not free, he is permitted. He does not reign, he is restrained. God's perfect timing ensures that every event serves its intended purpose. Just as the seasons change, just as the sun rises and sets at its appointed time, so too will Satan's end come exactly when God has decreed it. There is no uncertainty in this. The delay is not a lack of power, but a demonstration of divine order. Judgment will come, but it will come at the perfect moment, the moment when all things are fulfilled and the purpose of history reaches its final conclusion. God's ways are higher than human understanding, and his wisdom is beyond measure. What may seem like a delay or an unanswered question is, in reality, a profound revelation of his nature and purpose. The existence of Satan and the fallen angels is not an accident, nor is it a sign of God's weakness. It is part of a larger divine plan that operates beyond the limits of human reasoning. One of the greatest mysteries of God's sovereignty is how he uses even rebellion and opposition to fulfill his ultimate will. Satan, in his arrogance, believes himself to be working against God. Yet in reality, every action he takes falls within the boundaries of what God allows. The fallen angels, though they seek to corrupt, can never move beyond the limits set by divine authority. They are not free in the way they imagine. They are bound by God's greater design, unknowingly serving a purpose in the unfolding of history. In the story of Joseph, his brothers sought to destroy him. They sold him into slavery, thinking they had rid themselves of him forever. Yet what they intended for evil, God used for good. Through betrayal, hardship, and suffering, Joseph was positioned to save an entire nation from famine. His story was not derailed by the actions of his enemies. Rather, their actions became part of the very plan that God had ordained. What they meant for harm, God meant for good. This principle extends to the existence of Satan and his fallen angels. Their rebellion is real, their opposition is fierce, but their ultimate purpose is still under God's control. Consider the crucifixion of Jesus. Satan believed that by turning the hearts of men against Christ, he had achieved his greatest victory. The Son of God was betrayed, arrested, mocked, and nailed to a cross. Darkness covered the land, and all seemed lost. But in that very moment, the enemy's so-called triumph became his greatest defeat. The cross was not a moment of failure for God. It was the fulfillment of his greatest plan. What Satan meant for destruction, God used for salvation. The very act of rebellion was woven into the divine design, serving a purpose far beyond what the enemy could comprehend. This is the nature of God's sovereignty. He does not need to erase Satan in order to defeat him. He does not need to remove the fallen angels in order to render them powerless. Instead, he allows them to remain for a time, using even their rebellion to serve his greater greater will. They are like pawns in a game they do not understand, thinking they are fighting against God while unknowingly playing into his hands. Evil does not exist outside of God's knowledge or control. It is not an opposing force that threatens him. Rather, it is something that he permits, something that he weaves into the grand narrative of history to accomplish his ultimate purpose. The presence of darkness only makes the light shine brighter. The existence of opposition only magnifies the victory. Without resistance, there is no triumph. Without an enemy, there is no battle to be won. God's plan is one of ultimate redemption. He is not merely interested in removing evil. He is demonstrating his power over it. He is not simply wiping away rebellion. He is using it to reveal his glory. The very presence of Satan and his fallen angels serves as a testimony that nothing, not even the greatest act of defiance, can escape the sovereignty of God. The enemy believes he is free to operate, but he is on a leash. He believes he is working against God, but he is only fulfilling a purpose he does not understand. Just as Pharaoh hardened his heart against Moses, thinking he was defying God, yet in doing so became the instrument through which God's power was revealed, so too does Satan operate under the illusion of independence. But in the end, every action, every scheme, every rebellion will only serve to highlight the undeniable truth. God is in control, and his will shall be done. God has set the stage for a final reckoning, a moment in time when all evil will be judged and brought to an end. The existence of Satan and the fallen angels is not indefinite. It is temporary, and their fate has already been determined. The reason they still exist is not because God is unable to destroy them, but because his plan for judgment is set at an appointed time. Just as a judge does not pass sentence before the trial is complete, God has determined that the full measure of evil must be revealed before the final verdict is executed. Throughout history, God has demonstrated his patience in bringing judgment. He did not destroy Adam and Eve the moment they sinned, but instead allowed them to live out their days, bearing the consequences of their choice, while also setting in motion the plan of redemption. When the wickedness of humanity grew beyond measure in the days of Noah, he did not bring the flood without warning. He gave time for repentance, for the message to be preached, for his righteousness to be proclaimed. But when the appointed time arrived, judgment came with certainty and finality. The same pattern is seen with the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. The cities were steeped in sin, yet God did not bring fire and brimstone immediately. He allowed Abraham to intercede, demonstrating his willingness to spare even for the sake of a few righteous people. But once it was clear that wickedness had reached its fullness, judgment was carried out. Likewise, when Israel turned away from God and worshipped idols, he sent prophets to warn them, to call them back. He delayed judgment, not because he was powerless, but because he was giving time for the fullness of sin to be exposed. Satan and the fallen angels are under the same decree. Their end is already written. The lake of fire has been prepared and their judgment is sealed. Yet God, in his wisdom, has set a time for that final act. The enemy is allowed to roam for now, but not freely. He is bound by divine limits. He deceives, he tempts, he destroys, but only within the parameters God has permitted. Every act of rebellion, every lie he spreads, every soul he seeks to turn away from truth is known by God and accounted for in the final judgment. Revelation describes a day when Satan will be bound for 1,000 years, restrained from deceiving the nations. Even then, he is not immediately destroyed, but will be released for a short time. This is not because God is uncertain of what to do with him, but because the final exposure of evil must be complete. There must be no doubt, no lingering question. Humanity, having witnessed the full extent of rebellion, will see that God's judgment is just. The fallen angels, having chosen defiance from the beginning, will have no defense. Their destruction will not be an act of impulse, but the fulfillment of a decree that has been set since the beginning of time. This delay in judgment serves another purpose. It allows humanity to see the true nature of good and evil. If Satan had been erased the moment he fell, would humanity fully understand the consequences of rebellion? If there had been no temptation in the garden, would obedience have meant anything? If there were no opposition, would faith be tested and proven? The presence of the enemy, though temporary, has served to clarify the contrast between God's righteousness and the deception of darkness. In the end, the judgment will come not as an act of wrath alone, but as a demonstration of perfect justice. Every evil will be accounted for. Every deception will be exposed. The fallen angels will not escape, nor will Satan find any refuge. His fate is not uncertain. it is sealed. And when the time comes when all things have reached their appointed end, the final judgment will take place, not a moment too soon and not a moment too late. God's ways are not bound by human understanding. What may seem like a delay, a mystery, or even an unanswered challenge is, in reality, a masterpiece of divine wisdom. Satan and the fallen angels still exist, not because God lacks the power to destroy them, but because their presence serves a purpose within his greater plan. They unknowingly operate within the limits he has set, their rebellion exposing the true contrast between good and evil. Their continued existence is not a victory for darkness, but a testimony to God's sovereignty. Every deception, every act of defiance, every scheme they plot is already accounted for in the grand design of history. The cross proved that even the enemy's greatest plan of destruction was only a tool in the hands of God to accomplish salvation. But there is a day appointed for judgment. Evil will not reign forever. The fallen angels, along with their leader, have a fate that is sealed. When the fullness of time has come, when every soul has seen the truth, when every purpose has been fulfilled, then and only then will God execute his final judgment. Not a moment too soon, not a moment too late. Perfect justice, perfect wisdom, and perfect victory